Welcome back, friends, to the Nature Wanderer podcast. I'm Paul, and I'm your host, and this is part 2 of Winter Tree ID. Last week, we were at Knox Farm State Park talking about deciduous trees and how to identify them in the wintertime. The episode went a little bit too long, so I decided to split it into 2. So this is part 2. If you didn't get a chance to listen to part 1 last week, please check it out. It's got a lot of good information. This week we're going to concentrate more on coniferous or conifer trees, the ones that bear cones, have needles, and we'll get into a little more in depth on how to identify them. And this is more year-round because they pretty much look the same in the summer as they do the winter. But if we're talking Winter Tree ID, we got to cover all the trees if we can. So we're going to head out into the woods in a few minutes here, but I want to apologize for the quality of the audio this week. The microphone I was using, it was a new microphone. I was testing it out in the field, and unfortunately it picked up a lot of the background noise. I wasn't happy about that. It's going back. I am going to replace it. I'm still testing, trying to find a really good in the field microphone so that we can have a little better quality. So I do apologize for the background noise. Try to bear with it. I'm looking at new microphones, and hopefully the next time I'm out in the field, I'll have a really good one, and you won't even notice all the background noise. So strap on some shoes, and let's head out into the field and explore nature. One more thing that I like to look at in the winter time when I'm trying to identify trees is what we call the leaf scar. Okay, where the leaf fell off. Okay, remember we're in winter time, the leaves fell off the trees. Look where the leaf fell off, and usually underneath you have a little mark where the new branch will be coming out or the new leaf will be coming out. That will sometimes help you identify because the patterns are different, the shapes of the leaf scars can be different. And I'm not going to get into this too much because this is something where you really, really, really need a field guide. Okay, it will help you out. I will try to post some, the names of a few books that I use for tree identification, and that should, help you out. If I can find some apps for Tree ID, I'll try to post that as well. Maybe the links for that. I'll do that in the notes for this podcast. So now I'm coming into a section where we have some conifers. There's still not a lot. This is the park. The entire park is mostly hardwoods, but there are conifers in different sections of the park. And so let's talk a little bit about the conifers, or what we call cone bearing. Now they do have leaves, but we call them needles. Okay, so a needle is basically just a modified leaf. The modified leaf is it's just very thin, covered in a waxy coating. All of this allows it to keep moisture, retain moisture throughout the year. So that way they can keep their leaves on in the wintertime. They're very thin, so that when it snows and the heavy snows fall, they will hit the needles and basically just fall right off. Now there's another thing that helps that as well. Your conifers usually have very flimsy, very flexible leaves to them. So that way, when heavy snow gets on them, the branch is not sitting there trying to hold on and struggling. It's like, oh my God, this is so heavy, I can't hang on any longer. And all of a sudden the branch breaks. Now with conifer, the branches are so loose, flexible, that they will actually just bend when they get too much weight on them. And so they won't have to worry about the branches breaking. Oh, a little bit soggy through here. Good to have waterproof boots on. Headed over to a conifer. This one I don't even have to go up to. I was going to look at the needles, try to identify it, but I can identify it just walking up to it. Conifers are kind of interesting because they have a couple of systems for identification as well. So the conifers actually have some tricks that we can learn or use to identify them as well. With the conifers, there's different kind of families, I guess you could call them, where they are either pines, there are hemlocks, there are spruce. So there's several different types of conifers out there. And there's different little tricks you can learn to figure out what kind it is. Now, I do want to mention that there is a conifer, cone-bearing, that even though we call them evergreens, they don't keep their needles all winter long. The tamarack. Okay, the tamarack is the tree that actually loses its needles every winter. So with the conifers, if we're looking at the needles, that's one of the first things I look at as I look at the needles. Do they come in packages or do they not come in packages? And by packages, I mean bundles. Okay, are the needles in a bundle? Where the needles are attached to the branch, is it just a single needle attached to the branch? Or is it a bundle, a package of needles that are attached to the branch? If it's a package, P for package, P for pine. It's in the pine family. Okay, then if you can narrow it down to that, and this is Western New York here, if you can narrow it down that this is a pine that I'm seeing, it's in a package, there's more than one needle attached to the branch in each place. Okay, most of the pines are going to have two needles in each package. Not all of them, but most of them. If they have two needles, you either have a Scotch pine, you have a red pine, or you have some other type of pine. You have these pines. Yeah, even the naturalist sometimes has a brain fart and can't remember everything. But look at the length of the needles. If it's really long, it's going to be a red pine. Okay, the red pine has really long needles. The shorter one is the jack pine. The one that I'm looking at in front of me has two needles. They're kind of medium length, but what gave this away as I was walking up to this tree, what gave it away was the color of the bark. As I'm looking up, it almost has a color like butterscotch pudding. Butterscotch color. It must be a Scotch pine. Yes, so butterscotch, it's got medium length, double set of needles. If it has 5 needles in a package, okay, 5 needles, W-H-I-T-E, 5 letters, white pine. The white pine was actually a very sacred tree to the Native Americans that lived in this area in the northeastern U.S., the Iroquois. The Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee had 5 nations that came together in peace. Okay, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. And so the 5 needles coming together, it was a very sacred tree to them. If it only has a single needle, okay, if the needles have a stripe on them, S for stripe, S for spruce. Okay, if it's a flat needle, it's a hemlock. Okay, well, I'm actually coming up to a white pine here so I can see the 5 needles. Now, a white pine, we always think pine trees. They are triangular shape. You know, we think of our Christmas trees. They have that triangle pattern to them. Yet, the white pine does not have that triangle shape to it. It's a very, I don't know how to put it, messy tree. I mean, it has a very indistinctive shape to it. It's kind of like all over the place, the shape. So yeah, that's the white pine that has that shape to it. If it has that triangle shape and the branches are kind of hanging down, and I know I got away from needles here, but if the shape of the tree, if the branches are hanging down, they have kind of a wispy look to them, where they're kind of in an arch, almost like a telephone wire. When the telephone wire is going between the telephone poles, that wire has that arch to it. Okay, if the branches of the tree have the arch to it, okay, that's going to be a spruce tree. And if the spruce tree, lots of different spruces out there, you're going to have to narrow it down eventually, but maybe you're happy just knowing, hey, I can tell a spruce tree from a pine tree. And that's fine too. But the spruce trees, if you see, and it has kind of a bluish tinge to it, because the new growth on the end of the branches is kind of a bluish gray color, or maybe you want to say bluish green color. That is a blue spruce is what you're seeing. But like I said, there are other spruces out there. Okay, now we have a tree here, very short, flat needles on it. I just came across this tree. It has very short, flat needles, very full too. This tree, if you look closely at the needles, there's a really short stem between the flat part of the needle and the branch. Stem rhymes with hem, hemlock. Yes, this is a hemlock. So another little trick I've learned to help identify the conifer. But remember, just because they have needles, or if they don't have needles, I should say, just because it doesn't have needles doesn't mean it's not a conifer. Okay, we do have the tamarack, which loses its needles every winter. And so people will fool them. In the fall, it starts to look like a very brown dead tree. That's what it looks like. But those brown are the needles that are ready to fall off. And eventually they will fall off. We're going to head back into the woods here in a minute. I've been walking along the edge of the woods because that's where all the conifers are in this spot. But we're going to head back into the woods. So just kind of to wrap things up here, this is, like I said, just the basics of tree ID. The best thing to do, as I was mentioning, is to get a good field guide, a good tree ID field guide, one that has pictures of the tree in the summer and in the winter as well. And that'll really help you out with identifying what trees you're seeing out here. In the wintertime, you can still identify them. It just gets a little bit trickier in the wintertime. And the reason is because we don't have those leaves to look at anymore. If you get really good and you're looking at a conifer, I've got a friend who can identify conifers actually by the cones. I haven't gotten that good yet, but he can look at the cones on the ground, or if they're still hanging on the tree, and he can tell you what type of tree that is, what type of conifer that is. So those are my helpful hints to get you to identify trees in the wintertime. Remember, two main groups. You've got the deciduous trees, you've got the cone-bearing trees, the conifers. If it has needles, It's green all winter long, except for our one friend, the tamarack. If it's green, has needles, those are the pines, cone-bearing trees. If it has leaves and they're bare in the winter time, those are the deciduous trees or leaf-bearing trees. Look at the bark, opposite versus alternative branching. Look for any fruit or nuts, seeds that are still on the tree. That'll help you identify it as well. Look at the shape, the structure of the tree, and that goes with both deciduous and conifers. Look at, the different aspects of the tree overall. Leaf scars can help you as well. Leaves on the ground, or if you're in a nature center, one of the best things I've found to identify a tree is if it has a sign on the side of it that tells you what it is. But those aren't always there, especially if you're not at a nature center. I run across those every once in a while, and it's like, no kidding. But it's actually a very good way to start learning them. If you really want to start learning the trees, especially in the winter time, go to a nature center that has these signs on their trees. Once you see, that's a black cherry tree, then you can go up, you can look at the bark and say, it does look like burnt potato chips. I do see some tiny little cherry pieces up at the top. Sorry, I got distracted. Here looking up at the trees right now, and there is a bluebird looking down at me. So many people always think that, there's two of them. There's more than two. There's actually 4 of them that are watching me, and they're actually following me as I'm walking down the trail here. So usually in the winter time, everyone always thinks, the bluebirds have gone, because they're insectivores. But every year I see bluebirds in the winter time. But it's always enjoyable to see them, even though I know they're here in the winter as well. So I'm doing a little bird watching as well as looking at the trees. So anyhow, remember all these little clues. I actually have a bunch of nuts on the ground here, which will help me identify the tree that I'm standing underneath, which is an oak tree. And all these things put together will help you identify it. But get a good field guide. Look online, start, slow. Don't try to identify 100 trees all at once. The best way to learn how to identify anything, how to get good at it, is to practice. I didn't know my trees when I first started doing this. Trees were one of the furthest things from my mind. I love trees. I know they help the environment. They help us breathe, and we need trees. But identifying them was not my thing. I was more into, wildlife, like birds and mammals. But eventually I decided I really should learn my trees. And I started out slow. I'd pick a species. It's like I decided I'm going to learn about maples this week. And I spend the whole week looking at maples, learning about the different barks, the leaves, the fruits, everything about a maple. And once I felt comfortable that I could identify a maple tree, I went on to the next tree. And then I went on to the next tree. So I would go on to different species every week. And if it took me longer than a week to identify them and I shouldn't say identify them, but get used to knowing these trees and feeling comfortable knowing these trees, then I would move on to the next species. But I'd always go back and refresh my memory. And as you're driving down the road, and you're looking at the trees at the side of the road, think about it. So, that's a. Okay, so start identifying them. And another thing that I've always found helps me to recall what these species are is to teach them. Okay, once you start knowing them, maybe go up to your kids if you have kids, or your grandkids, or your spouse, and say, hey, you know what tree that is? Okay, that is and, it actually helps you to, kind of build that knowledge and have it sink into your mind so that you remember it over and over again. So I hope you enjoyed learning about trees. Be sure to visit Knox Farm State Park. It's a beautiful place. I always love hiking here. You can bring your dogs here. They are allowed. One of the few places in the area that I know of that you can actually bring your dogs on the trails. But always clean up after them. And this has a lot of history here at the park. They do have some events here. They have some wonderful nature programs. So check out their website. I'll leave a link in the notes. And enjoy learning about nature. Have a great day, and I will see you again next week. I hope you enjoyed the episode this week, and I hope you enjoyed learning about tree identification. Remember, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. But my opinion is you don't have to label everything. Get out there, explore nature, enjoy looking at the trees, enjoy touching the trees and being with the trees. But if you really want to know what they are, practice. Practice, practice, practice. And that way you get better at identifying them. So we've reached the end of our episode. If you enjoyed wandering through nature with me, please help me out just by rating, reviewing, downloading the podcast episodes. It really does help me out. And you can also share with your friends. Let's get more people involved in exploring nature with us. If you have any nature questions in general or ideas for future episodes, or you want to know more information about Tree ID, please feel free to contact me. You can DM me through Instagram. My Instagram page is the_nature_wanderer, or you can go to my website at naturewanderer.org. You can also support the podcast by joining my Patreon, which will also give you extras, including videos, bonus podcasts, pictures, and much more. I also have a store now on the website. If you go to naturewanderer.org and click on the tab for the store, I have all sorts of merch that has the Nature Wanderer logo on it. Show people how much you enjoy the podcast and show them your love for nature. Have a great week and keep exploring the nature around you.